Happy 2025, everybody. Welcome to the Business of Apps podcast. We invite app industry professionals to cover various topics, and we promise to do our best to keep it both insightful and brief. In this episode, we have Phil Carter, Growth Advisor at Elemental Growth. Phil, welcome to the Business of Apps podcast.
Thanks for having me, Art. I'm glad to be here.
Cool, thank you for coming, Phil. All right, we're going to move forward by setting the stage first. In the future, history textbooks will be telling the story of how, at the beginning of the second decade of the 21st century, we all collectively jumped into the world of mobile apps. Now, you may be super excited about the growth of the mobile app ecosystem, or shake your head about externalities, unintended consequences. But it is undeniable, mobile apps take a huge spot in our lives. Today, a big chunk of the mobile app ecosystem belongs to the app subscriptions. Netflix, Apple TV, Tinder, Duolingo, the list goes on and on. If you build the apps yourself and monetize them with a subscription model, you will be really interested to learn about Phil's subscription value loop strategy. Now, Phil, before diving into today's topic, what is your background in tech?
Sure. Yeah, so I started my career in the Bay Area in management consulting out of college. Spent a few years at Bain & Company, which was a great first job. Met a lot of lifelong friends and got a great foundational understanding of business and how to be a professional. Went to Stanford Business School and then got into venture capital. Spent a few years in early stage consumer mobile investing at Trinity Ventures. And then I've spent the last decade leading product and growth teams at multiple companies. I was the first product manager at Ibotta, which is a homegrown company here in the Denver Boulder area. Just actually went public last year, mobile digital coupons and rebates. Then I went to Quizlet, which is one of the largest ed tech companies in the world at this point, and built their product growth team from the ground up. Spent almost 4 years there. And then went to Fair and led international category and upmarket expansion at Fair. And about a year and a half ago, decided I wanted to go out on my own, start my own growth advising and consulting business, and specifically focus on helping consumer subscription businesses like Quizlet, because I found that a lot of these companies were just overlooked or underappreciated by investors or other advisors and consultants. And so I've been on this journey advising consumer subscription businesses for a year and a half now and really love the work.
Wow, that's pretty diverse career path. Okay. My first question to address today's topic on the table is this. What are the key challenges developers of subscription-based apps face when trying to build sustainable growth?
Sure, yeah, and I teach a course on consumer subscription growth, and one of the ways that I introduce the course is by saying that consumer subscription businesses are easy to launch but hard to scale. So what do I mean when I say that? There are a number of built-in advantages that consumer subscription apps have, thanks to the Apple and Google App Stores. You have turnkey global distribution, a lot of systems and infrastructure like payments and refunds are handled out of the box by those platforms. They also don't tend to be the most capital intensive businesses to get started, right? Because unlike enterprise SaaS businesses or two-sided marketplaces, you don't have to invest a ton of money building a really complex product or generating large amounts of network effects and getting to a tipping point before the business will really work. So consumer subscriptions are great in that they're easy to get off the ground, typically with, in some cases, no outside capital. In other cases, maybe you raise a small seed round, but it doesn't take a huge amount of venture funding to get them off the ground. The hard part is once you do get them out into the wild, they're difficult to scale. And they're difficult to scale for a few reasons. One is customer acquisition is hard, right? A lot of consumer subscription businesses grow primarily through paid advertising, much of it on Meta and Google. And at this point, those channels are very crowded. A lot of the alpha or incremental upside has been sort of commoditized, and so it's difficult to stand out. There's a lot of noise, a lot of other apps that are competing for consumer attention. And so as a result, paid acquisition has just gotten more and more expensive. And that was exacerbated further by the introduction of App Tracking Transparency, or ATT, by Apple a few years ago. So that's number one, customer acquisition is hard. Number two is retention is hard, right? Unlike B2B businesses, churn rates among consumer subscriptions tend to be much higher versus B2B subscriptions. And so it's hard to acquire users, but it's also hard to retain them for a long period of time. The latest State of Subscription Apps report by RevenueCat shows that even in the 75th percentile of consumer subscription apps, more than 50% of subscribers churn. Actually, it's more than 60% of subscribers churn within the first 3 months for monthly subscriptions and after the first year for annual subscriptions. So churn rates are high. And then finally, the third challenge is monetization is difficult. Consumers are fickle. There are a lot of substitutes in most of the popular consumer subscription app categories. And so that just means that you're not able to charge really high prices. Average revenue per user is much lower than an enterprise. And that also puts downward pressure on lifetime value, or LTV. So those are the three whammies of consumer subscription scaling. First, customer acquisition is expensive. Second, churn rates are higher than B2B. And third, monetization is more difficult. All of which just means you have to be really smart about how you build your core value promise and your growth strategy in order to scale sustainably.
Gotcha, Phil. I feel like we're at this point with subscription models where, the initial very high expectations when the space wasn't crowded was great. It was a clear path for growth. And at the moment when it was really hard to find new users, turn out you can actually monetize these people on a monthly basis or annual basis with a subscription model, just like any media company, music, movies, and that model was extended to many other categories of apps. But right now, with so many subscriptions, people look at their bills on a monthly basis and make a decision. Do I really want to get another subscription? Do I want to watch Netflix? Do I want to subscribe to Hulu? What about my subscription for Peloton? And that calculation becomes really hard. So yeah, that's definitely a huge challenge for people who are using apps and for developers who create apps based on the subscription model. Now, let's define the value. Let's talk about defining value for app users. As we're also painfully aware, the competition is really harsh, just like I said. How can subscription apps identify and refine the core value promise to stand out in the crowded market and drive long-term retention?
Yeah, so I love what you just laid out there. The phenomenon you're describing is often referred to as subscription fatigue. This idea that whether you look at streaming services and media and entertainment, or it's health and fitness, or education or productivity, there are just so many competing subscription products out there at this point. And at some point, the average American consumer is not going to pay for dozens and dozens of subscriptions, right? They just don't have the money. And so this gets to your question, which is, the core of the subscription value loop framework that I teach about in my course is a company's core value promise. In other words, what is the value that you're providing to a user, and ideally to a paying subscriber, that is going to not just bring them to the product in the first place, but cause them to continue paying you a subscription over a long period of time? And so when I describe how to build a strong core value promise, I use two specific words: unique and enduring. The first word is unique. That's pretty simple, right? It's in a world of hundreds of thousands of consumer subscription apps now on the Google and Apple app stores, you have to have a value promise that stands out, that isn't just commoditized. And the second word is enduring, which means you can't just deliver value for a month or two. You have to deliver value over years and years, ideally, in order to have a sustainable business that lasts for the long run.
All right. So, this is really two great components. And I don't think I can hear a lot about the second component, enduring, because people have a hard time to think long term. This is unfortunately a kind of a general trend. We're more preoccupied and focused on the short term gains and do not think really hard and efficient long term. But moving along to what app developers and brands can do, what strategies do you recommend for converting free users into subscribers while maintaining both a great user experience and ensuring long-term profitability?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a very broad question, but I'll try to break it down. So going back to the framework, we started with the core value promise. It needs to be unique and enduring so that you're offering value that customers can't get anywhere else. The rest of the framework centers around these three steps: value creation, value delivery, and value capture. And so the idea is that the best consumer subscription businesses, companies like Netflix, Spotify, Duolingo, Strava, AllTrails, Ladder, Tinder, Bumble, etc. These companies are harnessing that core value promise, and then they are translating the value from that value promise into a world-class product experience. So that's value creation. Value creation tends to be led by core product teams, and it's the foundation for everything else. And when I talk about value creation, I usually talk about the 4 R's. So value that is robust, rapid, repeatable, and revenue generating. Meaning it needs to be robust enough that you have strong product market fit with your customers. There are ways of measuring that, like the product market fit test. It needs to be rapid. Consumer attention spans have just gotten shorter and shorter over the last couple decades, right? There was a study in 2015 done by Microsoft that showed that the average human attention span had dropped from 12 seconds at the beginning of the millennium down to 8 seconds by 2015, which doesn't sound that significant, but that's like a 33% reduction in average human attention span over the course of less than 2 decades, right? And so you need to be delivering value rapidly within the user's first session, ideally within their first couple minutes of using your app. The 3rd R is repeatable, which goes back to an enduring value promise. You need to be delivering value over a long period of time. If you're delivering all your value up front within the first month or 2, then you're going to have subscribers churn once they hit diminishing returns. And then it needs to be revenue generating. Ultimately, it needs to be valuable enough that you don't just have free users using your product, you have subscribers paying you for it. So that's value creation, and some specific tactics that I talk about are using the 40% test. It's also called the Sean Ellis test to measure your product market fit score, and you can find more details about that online. Improving your onboarding experience, so making sure that you are emphasizing your core value promise, connecting users to the value of your app within ideally the first minute or 2 when they start using the product. You can also use SSO options like Google, Apple, and Facebook in order to streamline registration. You can use a framework that I call, well, it's not mine, it's called the Site Framework by Darius Contractor for streamlining your onboarding experience and front-loading more delight for users. You can use things like premium feature badging to emphasize your premium product experience and make sure people are aware of your subscription. All of that is part of value creation, which is the first step in the subscription value loop. Then we move to the second step, which is value delivery. And value delivery is typically led by marketing teams, sometimes with the support of growth product teams or sales teams if you have a B2B business. And value delivery is all about making sure that you have sustainable unit economics, right? You're going to have some amount of LTV that you get from users, but in order to have a sustainable business, you need a strong LTV over CAC ratio and a rapid payback period. And that depends critically on your cost of user acquisition. And the trap that I see a lot of consumer subscription businesses falling into is they get hooked on the drug of paid advertising, and then they can't get off of it. And what typically happens is things look rosy at the start because you're moving through your early adopters, right? Your highest intent users. And so LTVs are high, CACs are low, paid acquisition is easy. So you raise some venture capital funding and you just start pumping more and more money into the machine. The problem is as you move further and further outside of your core target user, your early adopter segment, the average user intent goes down, which means LTVs go down and CACs go up, and eventually your unit economics don't work anymore. But if you haven't already figured out how to grow organically, then your only option is to continue relying on paid ads, and at some point, the unit economics don't support paid advertising anymore, and the business grinds to a halt. So in terms of specific strategies to help grow on value delivery, there are really a few options for organic growth. There's App Store optimization, optimizing your App Store pages and the keywords you use in your App Store listings in order to drive more organic growth through the App Stores. There's search engine optimization, which is all about finding more users on the web through organic search queries on Google and other search engines. And then there's viral word of mouth, which is obviously hard to control. But there are tools you can use like Net Promoter Score and the word of mouth coefficient in order to measure the virality of your product and then identify ways to increase the virality of your product. So that's value delivery. And then finally, I know I'm throwing a lot at everyone, but the third step is value capture. I think this is the most overlooked step in the subscription value loop. And value capture is all about making sure that you're converting enough free users into subscribers and getting enough revenue per subscriber from your subscriptions and from your in-app purchases in order to make the business sustainable. And so under value capture, I talk about the 5 Ps. And the 5 Ps are pricing, packaging, paywalls, payments, and promotions. And these are all about just making sure that you maximize that conversion rate from free user to subscriber, that you make sure your pricing is optimized, because a lot of times companies will just set prices at whatever their competitors are charging, and then they won't revisit that pricing for years and years. Packaging your subscription the right way and making sure that, if you're going to have more than one plan, what's the right price between monthly and annual plans, or if you're offering weekly plans, what's the right price on your weekly plan. At some point, if you're large enough, you can look into offering multiple subscription tiers, like Tinder has Tinder Plus, Tinder Gold, Tinder Platinum, each with a different value prop. So there are a lot of other things you can do, but that's a sampling of some of the specific strategies and tactics that I talk about under each of the 3 steps: value creation, value delivery, and value capture.
So folks, you've got it. This is Phil's subscription value loop strategy. And you mentioned that 2015 research by Microsoft. I can only imagine what that attention span looks like these days, with TikTok being, paramount on people's list of spending their time online. And I really love your way of framing how do you deliver value, not in the first kind of a burst period, and kind of telling the long story. Like the difference between the short thriller or short TV and the TV series, when you're telling a story along the way from month to month, delivering the value consistently, and not kind of quote unquote telling the whole story right away. This is how you build endurance and be relevant on a monthly basis for your user base. And this is how you build your sustainable business in the app ecosystem. Now, that was the final question to wrap up the major topic on the table. And since, Phil, this is your first appearance on the show, I have just a few quick questions for the second part. And this is my way of not only covering the topic that is really important and useful for folks to learn, but kind of highlighting my guests a little bit. Here we go. So, question number 1, what smartphone do you have now? Have you been switching between these 2 giants or consistently stay one side all the time?
So I have an iPhone. I had to check this morning because I had forgotten what iPhone I have, but I have an iPhone 15, so it's one of the more recent models. And I've been an Apple loyalist, so I've been on iPhone for years and years. But my first smartphone going way back was actually a flip phone, and then I went to BlackBerry during my consulting days, which is what everybody was doing when I was in consulting at Bain in 2008 to 2011, and then when the iPhone came out, I jumped on it.
Got you. And if you can jump really back in time to the very first moment when you got your first mobile phone, what was that model? What was that flip phone?
I don't even remember, to be honest. It was when I was in high school. I'm turning 40 this year, so I graduated high school in 2004. My parents resisted letting me have any type of cell phone for years and years, but finally, when I was 17 or 18, they relented, and it was some sort of basic flip phone. It was probably Nokia, but I don't remember.
Yeah, back in the day, 20 years ago, it was possible to resist kids' pressure to get a phone. I don't think that's the case anymore these days, 20 years later. Okay, now back to present. So imagine you left your smartphone at home, you're out. What would be the most missing feature for you?
Yeah, well, in my course, I often ask people, what's your favorite consumer subscription app other than the one you work for? And I get all sorts of different answers, which is great because it just shows all of the amazing functionality that exists out there today. But I guess the first thing I would probably miss, I'll break it up into work versus personal. So on the work side, it's got to be Slack, right? Like I have my own growth advising and consulting business called Elemental Growth. Just hired my first employee. I'm working with up to a dozen clients concurrently. And so Slack is just a godsend because it makes communication so much easier and smoother across all these different people I'm working with. And they add all these different little surprise and delight things, like all the Slack emojis you can use to respond to messages and just comment on stuff. On the personal side, there's so many consumer subscription apps I really love, but my favorite is AllTrails. I live in Boulder, Colorado, and so there's a lot of outdoor stuff I love doing, and AllTrails is just a great way to get outside with my family, often with my 2 daughters, and we'll record the trail, we'll take photos, and then it kind of packages that all up into something nice that we can remember at the end of the hike.
Awesome. I can totally hear what you're saying about Slack. This is one of the apps for a business that I'm really passionate about using. And when ChatGPT came out, one of the first visual jokes for me was to ask ChatGPT, could you please draw for me cutting some slack as a pie on a plate and a knife? You're actually cutting some slack
Yeah.
out of the pie which looks like slack, in the colors of the company. So yeah, I do hear how useful that tool is and how ubiquitous in your daily business life. Now, if you look at your iPhone 15 these days and maybe wonder what's the missing, what would be a hardware or software feature for your phone to make it a better tool for you? Not necessarily something trendy and you can hear on the news, but for you personally.
Yeah, you're saying hardware specifically or just additional functionality on the phone?
Additional functionality could be a combination of both or either hardware or software.
I guess the way I'll answer that question, so I actually started my own iPhone app back in 2016 called Empath. It was a quantified self app for your emotional self, right? And so the same way that Fitbit or now Whoop and Aura are tracking your physical health, the idea behind Empath was it was going to track your emotional state, and you could log your emotion multiple times per day along with a short journal entry. And over time, the idea was that you were going to get a deeper understanding of your emotional health and wellness, and also like what brought you joy in life. The app ultimately grew to close to 10,000 monthly active users, but I just found that there wasn't really a sustainable business model there. And so I ended up, I'd put a small amount of money into it. I ended up selling it for a small amount of money and moving on. It still exists in the App Store today. And it's puttering along. I think there are still a handful of users using it. But I continue to believe that there's this huge opportunity, particularly in America, where the mental health pandemic is worse than it's ever been, with rates of depression and anxiety skyrocketing among Gen Z in particular. There's this huge opportunity for a product or a set of products that helps people better understand their own emotional state and make better decisions in their lives in order to be happier and healthier, thriving human beings. And I do think that artificial intelligence opens up all sorts of new opportunities to support that vision. So I guess if I were going to pick one thing that I would love to see more of, and this is less for me, it's more for, I'm the father of a 7 and a 5-year-old daughter. There's all sorts of research now that shows that teenage girls in particular are just having a really hard time in this country. And so I think a product like that would be really valuable.
Totally hear you. My daughter is 19 years old, but I do recall the days when she was that age. And fortunately, she was never exposed to Instagram back then. And I'm fully aware of the research that was done by the Instagram impact on the psyche of girls of teenage. And definitely, we need more apps that address that part of the human's health, not only physical. By the way, you sold your app before Apple launched the journal app, right? It was prior to that.
Yeah, I created my app in 2016 and I sold it in 2018. So this was many years ago. But then I did see when Apple launched that journaling feature, and it was remarkable to see some of the similarities. And then there are other apps too, like Reflectly is a good example that uses these anthropomorphic sort of human faces for logging emotion, which looked very similar to some of the UI that was in Empath.
Right. Yeah, this is great to see the development on that frontier and actually helping people to cope with the huge stress we all are dealing with on a daily basis. Before I let you go, very, very final question. How can people get in touch with you and get more information about what you do?
Sure. So as I said, I'm the founder and CEO of Elemental Growth. We're a growth advising firm focused 100% on seed to Series C consumer subscription businesses, helping those companies overcome the challenges of scaling that I was describing earlier in the podcast. Easiest way to find me is at my website. It's just www.philgcarter.com. You can also find me on socials at Phil G. Carter across LinkedIn, Substack, and X. And then a couple more things I'll say. So one, I do have a Maven course on consumer subscription growth. So if you go to maven.com, you can find my consumer subscription growth course. It actually just made Lenny Rachitsky's Lenny's List. So it's a very highly rated course. I've been teaching it for over a year now, had more than 300 members take the course. Net Promoter Score is close to 80%. And so it's been very popular. If that can be valuable to anybody looking for strategies, tools, and tactics to grow their consumer subscription business, would love to have you. Check it out on maven.com. And then the last thing is, if you're looking for more of a deeply engaged growth advisor, that's what I spend the majority of my time doing. So if you're a consumer subscription business and you're looking for help on everything from subscription pricing and packaging, paywall optimization, new user onboarding, organic acquisition strategies like SEO, ASO, word of mouth, you know where to find me, and I would love to learn more about your business and find out how I can help.
Awesome, Phil. We're going to make sure to put the links to all these resources into the description of this episode so people can check them out. Phil, thank you so much for coming on our show and sharing your knowledge and experience. It was great. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Art. It was my pleasure.
Bye-bye. And that was Phil Carter, Growth Advisor at Element of Growth. To listen to more episodes, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube podcasts. Just search for Business of Apps and you will find us easily. Remember, we release episodes on Mondays, so subscribe and you will be able to get new episodes on your smartphone, tablet, or computer if you still listen to podcasts on a computer. And please don't forget to leave us a review or comment on iTunes. It is highly appreciated. And all episodes will also be available on businessofapps.com. Thank you for listening. See you next week.